Ethics, Integrity, and Trust was a live webinar that was originally produced on Thursday, December 15th, 2016. The presenter for this presentation was Elaine Nisley with McConley & Asbury. Enjoy this webinar recap and visit us online at www.macpas.com for more information about our future events and presentations.
Well, welcome everyone to our ethics webinar today. In this session, we will look at business ethics in terms of developing an ethical culture in the organization, the results in the organization being viewed as having integrity and an organization that can be trusted. My name is Elaine Nisley, and I am a principal with McConley & Asbury, where we perform a variety of engagements in many different industries. Our engagements include Sarbanes-Oxley 404 implementations and ongoing testing, compliance audits, information technology general controls assessment, and business ethics evaluations. I look forward to spending the next 50 minutes with you talking about ethics. This webinar will provide recommendations on how organizations can address the integrity and trust issues caused by employees who do not make decisions that align with the ethics of the organization. We will discuss differing ethical perspectives, business and professional ethical codes of conduct, and methods to implement the code throughout the organization. We will discuss various ethical decision-making frameworks and how they can be applied in organizations. I will first provide a high-level overview of several ethical perspectives. Most people have an understanding of where they weigh in. Do you also know where your organization weighs in? There are many ethical perspectives to choose from. I have selected 5 common perspectives. They are the utilitarianism or greatest happiness principle, moral rights, common good, virtue or the character principle, and the justice principle where things are either good or bad. The utilitarian principle states of any 2 actions, the most ethical one will produce the greatest balance of benefits over harms. This ethical perspective focuses on the consequences that actions or policies have on the well-being of all persons directly or indirectly affected by the action or policy. People with this perspective make decisions based upon how the decision impacts the well-being of people. The principle is similar to that used by an investor to make an investment decision. An investment is good if it provides a return at or above the investor's expected rate of return, or the investment decision is bad if it is below the expected return. Someone making an ethical decision based upon results is looking for positive outcomes such as happiness, health, beauty, and knowledge, whereas negative outcomes would be misery, illness, ugliness, and ignorance. That is why this ethical perspective is known as the greatest happiness principle. There are frustrations associated with ethical decisions based upon the utilitarian principle. People who use this principle must take a broad view and not succumb to the temptation to protect the interest of a minority of the population while jeopardizing the good life for the majority. For example, a CEO who convinces the board to give him a $100 million bonus and ignores what it will take for the organization to provide the funding, such as layoffs or limited increases for the masses, this person has applied this principle individually and not as intended to consider the broader impact to society as a whole. The moral rights principle states each person has a fundamental right to be respected and treated as a free and equal person capable of making his or her own decisions. Ethical action is the one that best protects and respects the moral rights of those affected. 6 moral rights should be considered during decision-making. The right of free consent. Individuals are to be treated only as they knowingly and freely consent to be treated. The right to privacy. Individuals can choose to do as they please away from work and have control of information about their private life. The right of freedom of conscience. Individuals may refrain from carrying out any order that violates their moral norms and religious norms. The right of free speech. Individuals may criticize truthful ethics or the legality of the actions of others. The right to due process. Individuals have a right to an impartial hearing and fair treatment. And the right to life and safety. Individuals have a right to live without endangerment or violation of their health and safety. The fairness principle states, treat people the same unless there are morally relevant differences between them. Fairness focuses on how fairly or unfairly our actions distribute benefits and burdens among the members of a group. Fairness requires consistency in the way people are treated. An example of this is equal pay for equal work. There are two additional perspectives to the justice theory. The first is procedural justice. Think court of law, where the rules are very clear and they are consistently and impartially applied. The second is compensatory justice, which says that individuals should be compensated for the cost of their injuries by the party responsible for the injury, and that the party should not be held responsible if they have no control over the circumstances. The common good principle states, what is ethical is what advances the common good. This principle represents a vision of society as a community whose members are joined in a shared pursuit of values and goals they hold in common. The community is comprised of individuals whose own good is bound to the good of the whole. As such, we share certain common conditions and institutions upon which our welfare depends. For society to thrive, we need to safeguard the sustainability of our community for the good of all, including our weakest and most vulnerable members. Some things that nurture a healthy, functioning community are stable family life, good schools, affordable nourishment and health care, effective public safety, a just legal system, fair trade and commerce, a safe, well-managed ecosystem, an accessible technological environment, a well-maintained infrastructure, and a peaceful society. Out of this principle comes corporate initiatives for social responsibility, such as recycling and green initiatives. There is also the trend to give back to the community and support the community in which you live. The virtue principle states, what is ethical is what develops moral virtues in ourselves and our communities. Virtue focuses on attitudes, dispositions, or character traits that enable us to be and to act in ways that develop our human potential. Examples of these virtues include honesty, courage, faithfulness, trustworthiness, and integrity. This ethical principle argues that ethical actions should be consistent with ideal human virtues. Aristotle, for example, argued that ethics should be concerned with the whole of a person's life, not with the individual discrete actions a person may perform in any given situation. A person of good character would be one who has attained certain virtues. This approach is also prominent in non-Western contexts, especially in East Asia, where the tradition of the Chinese sage Confucius emphasizes the importance of acting virtuously. That is, in an appropriate manner in a variety of situations. Because virtue ethics is concerned with the entirety of a person's life, it takes the process of education and training seriously, and emphasizes the importance of role models to our understanding of how to engage ethically. When we apply virtue ethics to a situation, we try to identify the character traits, either positive or negative, that might motivate us in a given situation. We are concerned with what kind of person we should be and what our actions indicate about our character. We define ethical behavior as whatever a virtuous person would do in the situation, and we seek to develop similar virtues. Virtue ethics is useful in situations that ask what sort of person one should be. As a way of making sense of the world, it allows for a wide range of behaviors to be called ethical, as there might be many different types of good character and many paths to developing it. Consequently, it takes into account all parts of human experience and their role in ethical deliberation. As virtue ethics believe that all of one's experiences, emotions, and thoughts can influence the development of one's character. We have looked at 5 of the ethical perspectives and can see why people may have differing opinions about what is ethical. When there are clear black and white decisions, the ethical decisions are generally close, regardless of the person or organization's ethical perspective. For example, you are traveling on business with your spouse. Your receipt for dinner for 2 could easily be for 1 meal. Do you include the entire receipt for reimbursement or only your portion of the meal? In simple cases such as this, most people do not have difficulty making an ethical decision that most people will agree with. It is the gray areas that challenge organizations and their employees. Employees come with differing ethical perspectives, and yes, organizations come with their own ethical perspective. Usually, for organizations, their ethical perspective comes from the top. The organization has the challenge of conveying their ethical code and building a culture that aligns with the ethical perspective of the organization. Many organizations do this by putting their ethical expectations in writing in a business code of ethical conduct. Some organizations, such as a public accounting firm, have professional codes of ethics that their professional employees have agreed to abide by, and some organizations expect the message to be heard just by watching the actions of senior management. Whatever the process, many organizations continue to be challenged with employees who make decisions that do not align with the ethical values and perspective of the organization. So how does an organization teach their employees to make ethical decisions that align with the organization's principles? As we saw with the differing ethical perspectives, just telling a person to do the right thing does not always mean the same thing to everyone. On the bright side, as Socrates says, ethics consists of knowing what we ought to do, and such knowledge can be taught. Now that we have looked at the different ethical perspectives, we need to embark on the quest for a way to train our employees. But first, we must put some definition around our objective. In order for an organization to grow and prosper, they must have customers. Those customers must trust that the organization will do what they said they will do. That is, the organization must have integrity. As Zig Ziglar says, the most important persuasion tool you have in your entire arsenal is integrity. W. Clement Stone defines integrity as having the courage to say no and face the truth and doing the right thing because it is right. In order for an organization to be looked on as an organization with integrity and one that can be trusted, the organization and their employees must be on the same page. Their actions must be consistent, resulting in customers receiving the same message no matter who they talk to. I have often had very negative experiences with customer service personnel. When I am being treated badly by a customer service employee, I will usually stop the conversation and call back at a later time. I will then convey my negative experience and indicate that I do not think that is the way XYZ organization wants their customers treated. I usually receive an apology and a customer service person who wants to make things right. In that case, my trust in the organization is somewhat restored. In other cases, my return call results in the same rude treatment, and I then decide not to have further dealings with the organization. In decision-making, having a framework to follow is important. Ethical decision-making is no different. Scholars have come up with many types and varieties of frameworks. We will cover the following 5 frameworks. The Resolved Model by Jonathan Vanig, a professor of philosophy at Baylor University. Michael Davis's 7-step process developed at the Center for the Study of Ethics in the Profession at the Illinois Institute of Technology. The Marola framework developed by the Marola Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University that was co-founded by Apple and Mike and Linda Marola. And the final model is the PLUS model developed by the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, which is a best practices community of public and private organizations. The Resolved method includes 9 steps to making an ethical decision. You begin by reviewing the history, background, and any available details of the case. You then make your best estimate of the conflict or problem present in the case. That is, what is the issue at stake? You then move on to brainstorming and list the most viable solutions to the case. Next, you look at outcomes. Develop statements that define the important and probable outcome or consequences of each solution. Ask the questions: what will happen? What is likely to happen? What might happen? You then go on one step further to describe the likely impact of each main solution on people's lives and on the interest and concerns of entities such as institutions, organizations, companies, governments, and states. You also look at non-humans and the environment. Ask the questions: who or what will be benefited? Who or what will be harmed? Who or what else will be impacted, and how? In step 6, you do an assessment of the values upheld and those infringed by each main solution. Refer to relevant moral principles. Look at honesty, harm, fidelity, autonomy, confidentiality, lawfulness, equal consideration of interest, moral rights such as privacy, life, free expression, due process, safety, property, profitability. Include the consideration of the interest and rights of future generations. As you can see in this step, they're looking at a wide variety of the ethical perspectives and applying them all to the solutions. So now that you have defined the issue, possible solutions, and the impact of the various solutions, you evaluate each main solution in terms of outcomes, the likely impact, and values upheld or infringed upon. Using all of the information from the resolve section of the model, you decide which solution is best, state it, clarify its details, and justify it. The final step is to defend the decision against objections to its main weaknesses. You have now arrived at your solution to the ethical dilemma and have the facts to support and justify your decision. The next process we will look at is the Davis 7-step process. This step begins again by stating the problem. You ask the questions: do I have a conflict of interest? Does this make me uncomfortable? If so, in those cases, you may not be in a position to make an objective decision and you may want to consult with someone. But assuming you do not have a conflict of interest and are not uncomfortable making the decision, then you move on to step 2 and check all of the facts. This step is important because sometimes the problem disappears upon closer examination of the situation. Also, the problem may change radically upon closer review of the facts. Once you have decided you have an issue to deal with, you state the specifications, the limits and objectives, such as the applicable laws, professional code, corporate rules, cost constraints. Does it involve social issues such as children to feed? And then you develop a list of at least 5 options. Say yes, not yes or no options, but who to go to and what to say. After you've developed your 5 options, then you test your options using tests such as the following: the harms test. Does this option do less harm than any alternative? The publicity test. What would I want? Would I want my choice of this option published in the newspaper? Defensibility test. Could I defend my choice of this option before a congressional committee, a committee of my peers, or my parents? Reversibility test. Would I still think the choice of this option good if I were one of the people adversely affected by it? The virtue test. What would I become if I chose this option often? Professional test. What might my profession's ethics committee say about this option? The colleague test. What do my colleagues say when I describe my problem and suggest this option as my solution? Organization test. What does the organization's ethics officer or legal counsel say about this? So now that you've tested all 5 options, you look at the results of the test and make a tentative choice. And then you evaluate the choice by asking the question: does this solution solve the problem? After the final test in step 6, you decide if this is your final choice, or if you need to go back and go through steps 1 through 5 and make a different choice. After you have decided upon your final choice, you act upon that solution and then ask, what could make it less likely that you would have to make such a decision again? Do you need a policy change or a job change maybe? And so this final step provides an option to implement a permanent change to resolve the conflict. The third ethical framework is from the Marola Center for Applied Ethics. This framework begins by recognizing that an ethical issue exists. This recognition occurs by asking the question, is there something wrong personally, interpersonally, or socially? Could the conflict, the situation, or the decision be damaging to people in our community? Does the issue go beyond legal or institutional concerns? What does it do to people who have dignity, rights, and hopes for a better life together? Once you have decided that there is a potential ethical issue, you gather all the facts. You ask the following questions while gathering the facts. What are the relevant facts of the case? What facts are unknown? What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Do some have a greater stake because they have a special need or because we have special obligations to them? What are the options for acting? Have all the relevant persons and groups been consulted? If you showed your list of options to someone you respect, what would that person say? This framework then uses some of the ethical perspectives we discussed to evaluate alternative actions from various ethical perspectives. The objective of this process is to decide upon a solution from an objective point of view, looking at the potential solutions from a variety of viewpoints. This process requires one to set aside their individual perspective, step back, and be objective. The utilitarian action is one that will produce the greatest balance of benefits over harms. Even if not everyone gets all they want, will everyone's rights and dignity still be respected? The rights ethical action is the one that most dutifully respects the rights of all affected. Which option is fair to all stakeholders? Fairness or justice ethical action is the one that treats people equally, or if unequally, it treats people proportionately and fairly. Which option will help all participate more fully in the life we share as a family, community, and society? Common good ethical action is the one that contributes most to the achievement of a quality common life together. Would you want to become the sort of person who acts this way? Virtue ethical action is the one that embodies the habits and values of humans at their best. For the fourth step, you make a tentative decision and test it. Considering all of these perspectives, which one of the options is the right or best thing to do? If you told someone you respect why you chose this option, what would that person say? If you had to explain your decision on television, would you be comfortable doing so? Then for the last step, you make your final decision and act. After the solution is implemented, you then reflect on the decision. How did it turn out for all concerned? If you had to do it over again, what would you do differently? As in all of the ethical decision-making frameworks, the steps in the PLUS model are very similar. So in the PLUS methodology, you begin by defining the problem. You then go on to define the possible alternatives available to you in light of the problem you are facing and the resources that are available to you. You then move on to evaluate the alternatives for the PLUS methodology. You apply the following ethics filters. Policies. Is it consistent with my organization's policies, procedures, and guidelines? Legal. Is it acceptable under the applicable laws and regulations? Universal. Does it conform to the universal principles, values my organization has adopted? And myself. Does it satisfy my personal definition of right, good, and fair? After you have evaluated all of your alternatives, you make your best ethical decision. You now have the confidence that you can support your decision and go on to implement the decision. Since making good ethical decisions is a gray area, it is important to take the time to evaluate the results of the decision after implementation. Go back over the evaluation criteria you used in the decision-making process. Now that you know the actual outcome of your decision, would you answer any of the evaluation questions differently? What are the lessons you have learned? Why and how can you adjust future evaluations to apply the lessons learned? As we can see from the models we have reviewed, there is a similar process. A general model or framework for the ethical decision-making process includes defining the problem and possible solutions, evaluating the alternatives you defined, implementing the solution, and then evaluating the outcomes. Where the models differ is in the evaluation phase. This is where you, as an individual or an organization, decide upon the evaluation criteria. This is where you train employees to follow the evaluation criteria that aligns with the organization's ethical perspective. Many organizations develop a business code of ethical conduct, have new employees sign and acknowledge they received the code, and that is the extent of their attempt to instill the organization's ethical perspective into their employees. The same frequently occurs for professional codes of ethics. When people study for their certification, they are required to learn and understand the code of ethics. They then go into the workplace and the code of ethics gets put on the shelf. So how does an organization add to this space and develop an ethical culture within their workforce that is aligned with the ethical perspective of the organization? The key is continuous training. A key component of this training is providing an ethical decision-making framework to the employees and teaching them how to apply the framework. This involves using real-life ethical situations and teaching the employees how to apply the framework using the principles and values defined in the organization's business code of ethical conduct, and then arriving at an ethical solution that aligns with the organization's ethical perspective. We are now going to work through some examples of application of the ethical decision-making model or framework using the Institute of Internal Auditors Professional Code of Ethics and Hershey's Code of Ethical Business Conduct. Before we get into our case study, we've covered a lot of material on ethical perspectives and ethical decision-making processes. I just want to remind you that you can submit questions via text through the webinar software. For this exercise, we will apply the ethical decision-making framework to the Institute of Internal Auditors Professional Code of Ethics. The first thing we will review are the definitions of the 4 principles of the IIA code. They are integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, and competency. The first principle is integrity and is a value that is required of internal auditors. This character trait results in the internal auditor consistently providing the same answer in similar situations. The result is that people trust the auditor because they know they can place reliance upon the auditor's judgment. The second principle is objectivity, and it requires that the auditor to set aside their personal biases and assess the situation without influence from their own or someone else's interest. We also discussed the ability to look at a situation objectively during the evaluation phase of the ethical decision-making process. And I would also include that one should look use objectivity when gathering the facts of the case and defining the alternatives. The third principle requires auditors to maintain the confidentiality of the information they obtain during the audit process. While an auditor can disclose information to those who need to know internal to the organization, they must not divulge information outside of the organization unless they are legally required to do so by a court of law. Maintaining confidentiality is important. If the auditors do not have confidence, if the auditees do not have confidence that you will keep information confidential, they may be reluctant to share important information. The fourth principle requires that internal auditors have the competency or necessary skills and knowledge to perform the audit. If the auditor does not, they are required to bring this to the attention of the organization and take steps to either gain the knowledge or use someone who has the knowledge to complete the audit. Now that we understand the evaluation criteria, let's apply the framework. For this case study, We will make an ethical decision related to a possible ethical situation faced by an internal auditor. Just last month, Accounting Web reported that 20 to 29% of internal auditors report being pressured to alter audit findings. I remember being pressured to change an audit finding in order to support the president's desire to fire a member of his management team. I did not make the change, and fortunately there was no retaliation. Our problem is a situation where you have just completed a governance audit of senior management and the board of directors. The president makes it very clear that he expects you to alter some of the findings and suppress other findings. It is also pretty evident that your job is in danger if you do not comply. So after some brainstorming, I came up with 4 possible solutions to the problem. Of course, the easy solution is to comply with the request. That is, assuming it's easy if you can sleep at night after you've made that decision. But anyway, the next option is to try to negotiate a compromise where you dilute findings but do not remove the findings altogether. The third and fourth options make the assumption that the organization has a whistleblower hotline to report concerns and that you will use that avenue. The third option says you report the incident and do not issue the report until the issue is addressed. The fourth option is to report the incident and issue the full, unaltered audit report. The evaluation step is the application of the principle of the Code of Ethics to the identified solutions. Let's look at each of the 4 principles and apply them to the 4 solutions. The first principle is integrity. When you look at the first 3 solutions, you see that in all cases you have compromised your integrity by altering the facts or not reporting the facts. In most cases during an audit, someone has gone on the line to provide information. If the facts are changed or not reported, you lose credibility. Only the 4th solution passes the test of integrity. We must still continue to verify, though, that the 4th solution passes all of the other tests. The second principle is objectivity. By altering the report or not issuing the report, you have lost objectivity and allowed the judgment of others to influence your judgment. Only in the 4th solution do you maintain your objectivity. The third principle is confidentiality. This principle should be applied to the contents of the report to verify that you are reporting the facts and that you have not breached confidentiality. You should also review what you plan to report on the whistleblower hotline and verify that there is no breach of confidentiality. We will make the assumption that there is not a breach of confidentiality. And the 4th principle is competency. It is important to review the report and make sure you competently assessed all of the findings. If there is any doubt, it is important to obtain a second opinion to make sure that the report contains accurate facts that are supported with adequate evidence so that anyone can pick up the work papers and come to the same conclusion. We will assume that everything reported in the original report is accurate and fully supported. After the evaluation, only the 4th solution stands the test. So now you've decided that you are going to issue the report and report the president's action on the whistleblower hotline. Now, there are many different outcomes that can occur, and I have seen cases where people were terminated, reported the wrongdoing, and were reinstated with back pay. I've also seen cases where people were terminated and not reinstated. An article by the IIA indicated that internal auditors should start saving early in their career since there is a high likelihood they will be required to go against the Code of Ethics, and they should be prepared to lose their job in order to maintain the Code of Ethics of their profession. This situation is not limited to the internal audit profession. It's a high likelihood in financial or accounting circles as well. Regardless of what happens, if you use an ethical decision-making framework and make a well thought out and supported ethical decision, you have a clear conscience. Most companies do not do anything with their codes of conduct. They simply paste them on the wall. But with a simple Google search, I was able to find many good examples of organizations' codes of ethics, also called Code of Conduct, Ethical Code, or Code of Ethical Business Conduct. The document sets out the company's values, ethics, objectives, and responsibilities. A well-written code of ethics should also give guidance to employees on how to deal with certain ethical situations. And every code of ethics is different and should reflect the company's tone at the top, values, and business style. Some codes are short, setting out only general guidelines, and others are large manuals encompassing a huge variety of solutions. I decided to use Hershey's Code of Ethical Business Conduct as an example. I did check for copyright disclaimers and found none, and so I decided to use this document that is 44 pages long. It has simple principles that are defined, but also takes the time to provide many examples and explain how someone can assess whether their decision aligns with the corporate values. It also provides many avenues for employees to use if they have questions or concerns. We will now explore the code and apply our ethical decision-making framework. The Hershey Code of Ethical Business Conduct is based upon 4 key principles. These principles cover the broad areas of stockholders. As a publicly traded company, this covers a large and varied number of investors. Consumers, that is you and I, especially me since I love Hershey chocolate. And the global community. Hershey operates throughout the world and so has a very diverse workforce, supplier, and consumer base. And the marketplace. Again, Hershey has operations in all types of global economies and deals with a wide variety of partners, competitors, and suppliers. Now that we understand the evaluation criteria, let's apply the framework. For this case study, we will make an ethical decision related to a possible ethical situation faced by Hershey. This is a fabricated example of an issue that could be reported anonymously through the hotline. At issue is an isolated report of child labor where children are required to work 10-hour days in poor environmental conditions. Many companies have been opening factories in third world countries that do not have the same regulations on child labor as we have in the U.S. The basis of this ethical dilemma is the question: should U.S. companies apply the same standards to their factories in other countries as they apply to factories in the U.S.? The Fair Labor Standards Act establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record-keeping, and child labor standards affecting full-time and part-time workers in the private sector and federal, state, and local governments. Now, to this dilemma, I have listed 4 possible solutions to the problem. Of course, the first solution is the easy way out, since the solution justifies ignoring the isolated report because the company procedures for inspection and monitoring of the practices at their factories indicates there have been no violations of the standards that are set by the country in which the factories are located. The second solution is to wait and see if there are additional reports before applying any corporate resources to the issue. The third solution is to take the report seriously and use corporate resources to conduct a special investigation. The fourth solution is to use the information to assess and approve the current inspection process and, if warranted, conduct a review sooner than planned. The evaluation step is the application of the principles of the Hershey Code of Ethical Business Conduct to the identified solution. Let's look at each of the 4 principles and apply them to the 4 solutions. The first principle is to maintain stockholder trust. When you look at the first 2 solutions, you see that in all cases, you have the potential, in both cases, you have the potential to lose stockholder trust if you're not complying with the labor laws that the stockholders are accustomed to. That is, Hershey is a publicly traded company and has many stockholders that may not want to be invested in a company that supports child labor. With the first 2 solutions, there is a risk that stockholder trust may be diminished if the tip is accurate. Solutions 3 and 4 can provide a reasonable assurance and show that you have done your due diligence to verify that the conditions do not exist. On the other hand, Solution 3 may not be a prudent use of company assets and therefore may undermine the shareholder trust by not showing good fiduciary responsibility. The evaluation for consumer trust is similar to that of stockholder trust. When you look at the first 2 solutions, you see that in all cases you have the potential to lose consumer trust if you are not complying with the labor laws that the consumers are accustomed to. Hershey has a very large consumer base in the U.S., and many are opposed to child labor. Solutions 3 and 4 can provide a reasonable assurance and show that you have done your due diligence to verify that the conditions do not exist. On the other hand, if Solution 3 is the norm for responding to tips, there may be an increase in operational cost and an increase in the cost of the product to the consumer, which may result in loss of consumer trust. Complying with global trade laws and supporting communities will most likely not be an issue for any of the solutions except number 2, which takes a wait-and-see approach since no action is taken to determine if the factories are out of compliance. Assuming that the factory is owned by Hershey and the factory laborers are Hershey employees, the last principle would not apply. Let's assume, though, that Hershey contracts with a third party to purchase goods from the factory, and that Hershey conducts regular inspections of the facilities. In that case, options 1, 2, and 4 would be dealing fairly with all involved. Option 3 may be placing undue hardship on the business partner if a special investigation is conducted. Looking at the issue through the lens of the Hershey Code of Ethical Business Conduct, Solution 4 is the best solution. The fourth solution takes an existing process and evaluates and makes improvements to the existing process. By incorporating the solution into an existing process and making improvements, you have provided reasonable assurance that the organization will monitor this risk on an ongoing basis, protecting stockholder, consumer, and business partners' interest, and staying within the law. So we've gone through 2 different case studies, and I hope this has assisted you in understanding how you can apply an ethical decision-making framework within your organization. Again, we do have the question feature if anyone has any questions. Being seen as an ethical business that all of our stakeholders, from investors to consumers, and all of our business partners can trust does not just happen. It is a result of deliberate action that comes from the top. In very small businesses with a handful of employees, the day-to-day interaction from the owner can be sufficient to convey the ethical perspective of the organization. As an organization grows, there is a wider gap between senior management and the masses. In today's eclectic society, employees come from many different cultural backgrounds. One does not need to be a global business in order to have the challenges of many cultures and learned ethical values. It is important for employees It is important for businesses to take all of the implementation steps for a code of ethical business conduct. It begins with a written code that employees sign acknowledging receipt and agreeing to adhere to the principles. The employees must also be trained on an ongoing basis using examples of ethical dilemmas that apply to their position in the company. Employees must be trained on how to use an ethical decision-making process. Hold discussions about ethics in meetings, especially when the message is coming from the top. These are all ways to embed the organization's code of ethical business conduct into the culture of the organization. When all of these actions are working in the organization, it is time to evaluate the effectiveness of the process. An ethical business evaluation is a very important part of the implementation of the Code of Ethical Business Conduct. Internally, organizations tend to hear and see what they believe is happening. Many times, the organization does not know what it does not know. This is where an independent evaluator can add value. In my ethical business evaluation engagements, management is often surprised at what their employees will say when given the opportunity to talk to someone who is not in their chain of command. I have found that coming out of the evaluation of an organization's implementation of the Code of Ethical Business Conduct, there are always opportunities to improve the implementation. Do you really know what is happening in the trenches of your organization? Do you know how your employees' interaction with the outside world is being perceived? Do you know if intimidation is occurring within your organization? These are just a few of the questions that an ethical business evaluation will answer.
Thank you once again for joining us for this presentation produced by McConley & Asbury. We hope you join us for our upcoming events. You can stay up to date with news and learn more about our upcoming events by visiting us at www.macpas.com. Thanks again, and have a great day.